she's with you.
Come on up, yeah. You have one? Just go, Mike.
Here's the matching cord.
Good evening. I don't want to miss any names. So we're here tonight, benefit of a technical assistance grant from Mass Development that we received last year. Amanda Gregoire, who works for Mass Development, wanted to be here but had a conflict in her schedule. So I said I would let you guys know Mass Development paid for this technical assistance. They reached out to the Barrett Group and engaged them, who have prepared this whole report. This is Elizabeth Haney here with us tonight, who has been sort of our main point of contact and has been fabulous. We also received a $25,000 earmark from Allison Sullivan in last year's budget, and that money paid for, excuse me, the Habib Group, which did the center school building study. Excuse me. I also want to thank Pam and Ellen, who came to most every meeting we had in our check-in meetings throughout this whole process. And like you, they are volunteers, and this was extra duty for them too. So without further ado, I'll let Elizabeth.
Yep.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great getting to know Abington. My name is Elizabeth Haney. As Liz said, I'm a community planner with Barrett Planning Group. And sorry, let me just see, it's auto advancing and I need to stop it. All right, hopefully this won't keep going without me. And so, as Liz said, Liz and Scott have been involved, as well as Ellen and Pam, who were representing the Affordable Housing Trust. And tonight I'll be talking about some of the highlights from our site analysis, what we heard from the community. We'll be looking at some case study schools for what other communities have done with schools that they needed to dispose of, and then giving you folks a summary of the opportunities as well as the constraints and challenges and our recommendations. So this is the site of where the center school is. So you can see it's tucked into a residential neighborhood that's kind of on the corner of Summer Street and Washington Street. The school itself has entrances for cars on Thaxter Ave and Walnut Street. And so some context for why are we talking about reusing this site. So at the 2019 town meeting, the voters at town meeting voted to authorize the selectmen to dispose of all or portions of this property. And so it's important to note that though the school is surrounded by parking and a playground right next to the school, the site's actually on a pretty big parcel. It's 13 acres, and that includes Murphy Field and a pretty big wooded area between the school and the fields. And so in talking with Scott Lambiese, the town manager, he's indicated that it's the town's intention to preserve Murphy Field, as well as parking and some access to the field. And so some of the logistics for how do you get a car in there, that's going to depend on what you do at the center school site. So that hasn't been subdivided or officially protected in any way at this time. And so we'll get into some of what we found in the site analysis. So here's the school if you didn't attend there. But this is a school that was built in 1939 as part of the Works Progress Administration. And it is on town water and sewer. And it's kind of hard to read, but these are the original blueprints from 1939. These blueprints are of actually the North School, but the North School and the Center School were sister schools, so they share the same layout. 6 classrooms on each floor with a gymnasium attached. And so here's a photo of the gym at the Center School, and then what one of those classrooms looks like. So in pretty good shape, beautiful wood floors. As part of this work, the town contracted with a separate consultant, which was Habib and Associates. So they actually did a code review and an assessment of the building's condition. And so on the positive side, the things they found in that code review was that the roof framing is in good condition. From what they could see of the masonry and the floor framing, there was no structural deficiencies. And the facade's in pretty good condition with a few defects. That said, the roof system has exceeded its serviceable life. If you do reuse this building, it's going to need a new roof. And there may be some deterioration in the first floor framing, but that needs to be confirmed by a structural engineer before you did anything with the building. And if you do decide to reuse the building, it'll need all new windows. So that's kind of the building. And then taking a step back, we wanted to highlight some of the natural features on the site. So you've got bedrock pretty close to the surface, and then you do have that wooded area, and the picture on the right is the view of what it looks like if you walk from the school down to Murphy Field. This is an aerial view of what the site looks like from the air, so it really truly is tucked into among a bunch of single-family homes. Both the field and the school are surrounded on all sides with single-family homes. But the school is pretty centrally located in Abington. It has easy access with some shops and things like that over on Washington Street, and it is within 3/4 of a mile of the commuter rail. So here's an aerial just to point out kind of what it's close to. And so you can see that center ring is a 1/4 mile, then it goes a 1/2 mile, and then a mile. And so you can see that there's, a few amenities within a 1/2 mile, and then, within a mile, really quick drive to the senior center, and pretty close to Target and Stop and Shop if someone wanted to do shopping from this site. So as part of our analysis, we also looked at kind of what's happening in the housing market and what's the need for housing. So this is a chart of Abington's home prices from 2002 to 2022. And so you can see from 2013 to 2022, the median home price has almost doubled. So $255 back in 2013, up to $500,000 as of the time we made this chart this year. You see a similar trend in Abington rents. These are just rents in larger buildings, but what you can see is for a 2-bedroom, rents are around $2,300 a month, and projected to keep going up. And so kind of, with some market analysis, we also looked at housing need, and to kind of get a sense of what are folks at the Housing Authority hearing, we reached out to them, and they told us what they're seeing and how many folks are on their waiting list. So for the elderly buildings that are in Abington, there's 109 units, and the number of folks who are on the centralized waiting list, there's almost 4,000. And so, for those folks on the waiting list who are hoping to find a unit, there's about 8 to 12 units that are opening up every year. There are 3 family units that are part of that Housing Authority stock, 2. And the waiting list for those, there's about 6,000 people looking for housing there. And there's only 2 units, and those families, have found secure housing. So typically, those units aren't opening up every year. So that's some context on kind of what's the town seeing in terms of need for affordable housing. And as part of our work, understanding what is affordable housing folks had different conceptions. So one thing we like to do, so if you work in housing and someone comes into your office and says, I'd like to apply, you'll take their documents and their income and you'll compare it to this chart. And so what this means are there's different categories of income, and then you look to see how many people are in the household, and that's going to dictate whether folks apply. So, someone couldn't qualify for low-income housing. If they're one person, their income has to be lower than if it's a family with 3 kids. But still, this doesn't really make it fleshy for what does this mean? Who would this be? So one thing we like to do is to compare, what does an income category look like against real jobs and real working people? So what you can see in here is we have wage data from folks this is wage data from Abington, careers in Abington, and what categories they might fall into. So you can see under the low income category, a daycare provider who's married to an insurance agent who has one child, they'd qualify under the low income category. Whereas someone working in a nursing home with 1 child might qualify under the extremely low income category. So that's just some background. And then we also worked with the community. We did a survey and did a community meeting. We had 351 responses to that survey. And so what we found in the survey was that most folks who responded to the survey reported rarely using the site. And the concerns that most folks had were about added traffic and the impact of any development on the drinking water supply. Preserving the wooded areas on the site was extremely important, according to folks who took the survey, both but the woods between the site and homes and the woods at the center of the site. We also found that the community was almost evenly split on whether to convert the school to senior housing or to demolish it to create more open space in Abington. When we zeroed in on the survey results for folks who said they lived in Abington, there was a little bit more support for creating senior housing. And then I have a few slides with survey results that I can go back to, but I won't read them off just in the interest of time. And so that's what we heard from the community, but then we also turned and we looked at what are other communities doing. And so some of the schools that we looked at were the McElwain School in Bridgewater. Auburn had sister schools as well, the Bancroft and Stone schools that they converted into affordable senior housing. Out in Baldwinville in Central Mass, they're in the process of converting an old school into affordable housing and market rate housing. And up in Swampscott, they converted a historic school into affordable housing. Kind of a different flavor, up in Pepperell, they had a much larger school, but they actually converted that school to a community center with art space and a commercial kitchen. That school was a little bit older, a little bit bigger than the other schools I just mentioned. And so in looking at all those schools, the kind of common themes that came out were some of the schools attempted to sell the schools for profit, but they didn't find any success. They didn't get any responses. A couple of these towns used an RFI process. So an RFI is a request for information where you ask the development community or community groups to give ideas about what should be done with the building. And some towns did that in order to know what they put in a request for proposals. And that's where you would actually go out to get bids on this site, or on a site. In those communities where they added affordable housing and went through development, it was really important to involve the community and neighbors from the beginning. And then again, when you're thinking about those RFPs, it's really competitive and it's hard out there. These towns only received 1 or 2 responses when they did put these schools out to bid. And then all the projects where they added affordable housing to the historic school involved adding more units outside the footprint of the school. And some of these towns had success. They added the schools to the National Register of Historic Places, and that opened up subsidies that they wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. And local communities can be supportive if local dollars are contributed to a project, and local officials submit letters of support. This is just a little summary of how many RFP responses and how long it took, how much it cost. And then what the breakdown is. So you can see the blue and the red, that's the new building. The gold is how many units you fit in the historic school. And so why did they add those additional units? It spread expensive rehabilitation costs across more units. This is expensive construction. Those schools in the case studies, it was $370 to $507 per unit to make those projects happen. It also made them more competitive versus state dollars for subsidy so that you could use low-income housing tax credits. And it also meant that if you're going to operate a building, it's big enough, you can pay a full-time maintenance property manager, or if you're talking about seniors, having resident services there. And so looking forward, some of the constraints and challenges that Abington should keep in mind. The school is vacant, and the potential for rehabilitation could get worse with no action. Neighbors who walked the site with us and folks who took the survey reported the schools often use it as a hangout site for youth who use it for drinking. And you could see it when we walked around. There were broken windows and signs of trespassing, some spray paint. And as we talked about in the code review, the roof has ended its serviceable life, so it would need a roof replacement as of today, and that's not in the future. To get a sense of what it would cost if the town was to just demolish this, the town has worked to explore putting a new fire station at the North School, which is a sister school, so similar scale, materials, vintage, and the quote that the town received for that indicated that it was going to cost about $1.2 million to bring that building down and to remediate the hazardous materials that were in that school. And so then if you're looking towards how would you reuse the school, so you're not demolishing it, but you still have to rehab it, the consultants the town contracted with developed a couple typical layout plans. So you can see it's really converting those old classrooms into apartments, as well as the gym in this scenario. And then just this is a slight difference. There's a lounge over in the gym. And so if you were going to redevelop this site and shift those classrooms into apartments, you'd still have to deal with asbestos, and you'd still have to deal with the likely presence of lead paint. Those layout drawings I just showed, they show about 15 or 16 units that could fit within the historic building. That's probably ambitious, because if you look back at these layouts, you'll see there's really skinny units over on the left side of the screen. And if you're thinking about seniors who need a 5-foot turning radius, that might be a little bit ambitious to say those side units could be appropriate for seniors. And so if you're looking at, we just want to use the existing footprint of the school, it's smaller than where the most money is available at the state to make affordable housing happen. The state has this subsidy program called the Community Scale Housing Initiative, but that project has development cost limits of $350,000 per unit, so it's unclear if that would really work for rehabbing a historic school. And then if you are thinking about redevelopment, if you want to start digging on that site where there's that bedrock, that can increase project costs pretty fast. So those are some of the constraints, some of the opportunities. So this is a 13-acre site. Even doing some development on the school site, it should be possible to preserve some open space. In some of those case studies I showed before, the developers actually invested in fields or playgrounds. So in Auburn, they invested $25,000 in each of the playgrounds at those sister schools that they worked on. Using the site for housing could also address housing needs. So if you go look at the town's comprehensive plan or the housing production plan, that has goals to both create more affordable housing for seniors, as well as use town-owned properties to add affordable housing. And then if you did have affordable housing on this site, it could contribute to the subsidized housing initiative, where you're looking to get to 10%. Abington's currently at 7.7%. The site is fairly close to the senior center, so some folks say sometimes, if you align services, that can be assisted living light for residents. And there are some state dollars available to support projects with enhanced services like that. So one unique opportunity at this site is if you did use this for 100% affordable housing, it'd be kind of different than some of the 40B projects that Abington has seen recently. Some of those 40B projects, they're mostly market rate and they have a portion of affordable housing. This could be an opportunity to add 100% affordable housing. And because it is, and because there are dollars available at the state level for affordable housing and at the federal level for historic tax credits, shifting the school into affordable housing could actually be a good strategy for preserving this school that a lot of folks in Abington have connections to. And would be possible to use, it's called the Local Initiative Program. Some folks talk about it as the friendly 40B, and so that's where the town can work collaboratively with the developer to make sure what's proposed is in line with, community, neighborhood ideals, the community and the town, that the design that moves forward is something you work on together. And so our recommendations are to clarify the status of Murphy Field, so just to make, the community was very concerned about what was going to happen there, but to communicate with them about what the next steps are in protecting that site. To engage the developer community in the RFI process, that can help get the town kind of understanding what would need to happen to convert this to affordable housing. You can get some ideas, some prospective designs visible. And so that would fit into a larger planning process like this. So we went through a planning process and identified kind of reuse criteria. If you did an RFI, you could decide whether you wanted to issue an RFP. Hopefully you'd get a developer with a proposal you really liked, and then they would go through a few rounds of applying for funding, go under construction, and then it would be ready for occupancy. And so, this can be anywhere from 3 to 5 years. Those funding rounds can take multiple years. It seems like there might be more public engagement on housing that would be useful. There's kind of different ideas about who would live in affordable housing and who it would serve. And then some of the other communities, they had success where a developer was selected through an RFP, and they actually had design charrettes with the community, and they helped design the building and the program. And so last, if you did want to move forward with renovating the school, getting the school in the National Register of Historic Places will make it easier to make the project happen. It brings additional dollars that make that cost of construction, that cost of remediation lower. And so that can make it so that the project's actually possible. And that's what I have for you guys tonight.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
Ava? That was good. Informative.
Any questions from the audience? Please come up and speak into the microphone and give your address.
My name's Mike Wallace. I'm at 88 Summer Street. I abut this property. I see you saying you want to preserve Murphy Field and a little bit of the woods. How come preserving all the woods aren't on the options?
Everything's an option.
decisions have
We haven't made any
Well, it's
decisions.
just when you put it up on the screen like that, and you got it all shaded, and you got a big piece of woods not shaded.
There's
it makes
nothing
it look-
proposed there yet.
Yeah.
That was my editing of a slide to show that the town's intention is to preserve the field and a way to get to the field. It's purely, it's symbolic.
No decisions have been made on anything up there at this point. This is just all informational.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I mean, the survey results, I think they put preserving the trees over making senior housing, so I think it's a safe bet that every tree will be saved on that lot.
Ron, you were next.
Ronald Howe, 149 Walnut Street. I also abut the property. At the community meeting that we had on Zoom, it was stated that the town had no intention of expanding from the footprint of the school. And yet, according to the survey and all the other example projects or whatever, it was the school being reused, but then an additional building being built.
Again, there's been no decisions made whatsoever. This is
Right.
all purely informational.
But I think it is important to note that, that certainly any expansion of that building would probably be way too expensive. I mean, it is not that the bedrock is close to the surface, it's coming right out of the
Right,
surface.
bedrock's there and.
So,
really
the other
room.
part of it is, though, is to continue, look, we're gonna spend either $1.2 million to tear this down, or we can do a little more homework, and still, if we want to do an RFI, there may be some opportunities, and there may be a possibility that someone could come in there for a dozen or 16 units. Again, we may even want to pair it with the North School. When we started this endeavor, the North School was still in play as a possibility for a fire station, so we really focused on this. But at this point, if we wanted to go forward with an RFI, we may even just bundle the two projects together, which may give somebody a development aid that gives them the cost as far as maintenance and having property maintenance might be more reasonable if they had both buildings, and it may give them the number of units that if they could do them simultaneously, it might work. But at this point, again, we're just kind of looking at what the conceptuals are. And it is good to note, though, and I'm glad we did realize that most of these other success stories did something that we're really not interested in doing, which is developing the site. It's not, it's very obvious to me and to just the discussions I've had the night that we were on the Zoom meeting, and then again in other discussions we've had, that the best reuse of that property is to preserve that wooded area, all of it, and to preserve that field, and to preserve access to that baseball field. So that being said, using what we have is the road we want to go down.
Okay.
Where that'll lead us, I don't know. At the end of the day, we may still be looking to spend $1.2 million plus to tear it down, because then you'd have to, obviously fix the site after we've got a big hole.
Right.
And if that's the case, to create more open space, that's fine. But I think we have to do a little bit more homework first.
Okay.
But let's be clear that these are all just ideas. Nothing is set in stone. The building's not being redeveloped tomorrow, if ever. So these are just options that we're trying to look at to find out the best use of that and the North School, and try and do what the town wants us to do.
Correct, and I think, Scott, I was on the Zoom call as well. It was very much unanimous that preserving the footprint of the center school property and the woods, the park, that was, if there was one thing that we took away from that, was that's what the community wants. So I think any decision we do moving forward, we keep that as the forefront, that we are preserving the footprint.
Well, and I think as Elizabeth will tell you, the next step is asking for input from the development community. So the next step is to say, what sort of thing would work and what would you see here? And if that's what they come back with and that's not what we're interested in, then we make a decision from there.
Elizabeth, you mentioned, I was kind of intrigued by it, the National Register of Historical Sites. So what, can you elaborate more on what the town could potentially get if it was deemed as a historical site?
Yeah, so a town can put a building on the National Register of Historic Places, and that opens up an additional source of tax credit equity that isn't available to a new construction building. So the project in Bridgewater is a good example where they worked with a consultant to get the school on the National Register, and then that opened up additional dollars just to make a very expensive project less expensive, because in each of these historic schools, you have to remediate, and then also you have to ensure the structure's good for these schools, and in a lot of cases, that's more expensive than new construction.
Maybe this is too much, but how much, like, hypothetically, or actually not hypothetically, Bridgewater, what did they receive to have that school be deemed as a historical place?
So I think you have to document the history and submit an application to the National Register. And so typically in Massachusetts, folks work with a historic consultant in order to make that happen. So in Bridgewater, they worked with, I think the woman's name was Jen Goldson. And so they worked actually, before they put the schools out to RFP, they worked to get the schools, or to get the school on the National Register, so that when they went to go do something with it, there was additional subsidy available to make what they wanted to happen.
And I would caution that I think we would probably want to be really sure on the path that we're going before we do such a thing, because we don't want to make it difficult.
To do something there, right.
They preserved that school and then added another building to that school?
Yeah, it's in the very back of this drawing. You probably can't see
So it's
it,
not
but yeah.
necessarily, I mean, and I'm not looking to build more and increase footprint again, but if you did that, you could still build an additional building. Like
Yeah.
The North School, seems like it would be a better site for that.
Yeah, so
To expand.
you can't really see it, but in the image on the right here, that's the Mary Stone School in Auburn, and you can't see it, but off the back of this school, they actually, they had an addition, and so it's interesting, because it was part of a historic, it was on the National Register, it comes with requirements. So the new addition had to look like it matched with the historic building, which was pretty interesting.
Could you go, in addition on, but could you build up on these buildings as well? Like if you wanted to build like a third floor onto it?
I am not a structural engineer, so I can't speak to that.
I'm just
It'd
curious.
be difficult on these buildings.
I mean, if
at
you're
best.
gonna make it ADA, you're gonna put elevators, you have to put elevators in it, you have to do all these things. I'm just curious.
I think, at some point, you just get to be, that per unit cost is going to be too much. So even adding a third floor, you're only going to gain 6 units at best.
I agree. The buildings are
But-
as small as they are. Like, look at that building in Bridgewater, they had 38 units. It seems like a lot of historic buildings are small, so you have very minimal number of units. So, the cost is going to be high at that alone, let alone building, adding on, if you will.
Yeah, it's certainly without subsidies and without the tax credits for it being, if we made it a historic building, we're not likely to see this project go forward, those things. But, it's still a little early to say.
Build a skyscraper.
We can build a skyscraper in Braintree.
That's Kay Damasio at abingtonmass.gov.
Anything else from anyone?
There's,
Oh, yes. Please come up and state your name.
My name's Elijah Chris, I live on Walnut Street. I've been,
You have to use the microphone, please.
Step right up to the podium right
they're
here.
recording it, so, thanks.
my name's Elijah Chris, and I live on Walnut Street. I've been on that property twice this week. My kids learned to ride their bikes on that property. A couple of questions that I had. One, I guess maybe just preface this. I couldn't help but feel when I read the survey and then listened to the discussion, the Zoom meeting, that very much of this seemed to be steered towards a certain outcome. And the question specifically that I had was when in the survey that went out, where I know that the online survey was available for residents to take, but I also know that there were paper surveys that went out. I was curious if we could be made aware of like what portion of those were paper surveys that were returned in the survey results, and also where those surveys were targeted to. How were people given those surveys? Were they all handed out at the senior center, or were they handed out, you know, to residences or whatnot? Because I do feel like this was pushed a certain direction. Even the language during the meeting and the language during our presentation seems to be, how are we going to develop this, and what kind of affordable housing options are we going to put into place here? When in reality, I look around and I see a lot of my neighbors, and the conversations that I'm familiar with in town, obviously we're very interested in this. I haven't heard anybody that wants this place developed. I mean, I know that there are, you know, the senior housing committee wants it done. None of the neighbors do.
What would you like to see there?
Ideally, I would have liked to see the building not wasted to begin with. A fair amount of maintenance would have gone a long way. We've
But
got
here
a
we are.
bad habit in this town of letting our resources go to waste.
Fair, but here
No,
we are, so
but-
what
but
would you
here-
like to see in there?
So wave a magic wand, I'd put up, well, we know it needs a roof. That doesn't cost $1.2 million. We know it needs to be cleaned up. That isn't going to cost $1.2 million. To reuse it, there may be some abatement that's necessary. But I would have liked to see the school restored before it got too late. If it is too late, bulldoze it and put a...
Restored to what?
But what would you like to see there is my question. I know, we all know it needs.
Right,
roof.
right
I
now?
understand that. Yeah, right
At-
now.
At this point,
Yeah,
I
as
would,
a
I would love
resident
to, I would love to
living
see
there.
the building used for the town's purposes, whether that be recreational, or I'd like to see it bulldozed, leveled, and left open for people to use. And have the, most importantly, I think let me just get to the gist of your question.
Yeah.
I'd like to see the town assume responsibility for its assets, stop trying to liquidate them, stop saying, you know, developer with a gleam in our eyes, and hold on to what we have. I don't think anybody I've talked to feels strongly that we need to shove more residential units in there. But specifically, my questions again were, how is this polling targeted? I'm aware of online, and anybody could have gone online to do that, but a fair amount of it I know was paper responses. I'm just curious where those came from.
I think the answer's coming up
Yeah.
behind you. Thank you.
I filled out a paper one, by the way.
I had the paper surveys.
Yeah, it was right downstairs.
They were left down at the senior housing on Glenwood's Way. They were left at the senior housing on Shar Ave because traditionally those are people without access to computers. It was to give them an opportunity, and I have to say, very few responses came from the one on Glenwood's Way. It was left at the senior center. It was left at the library. We brought it voting day.
Town meeting?
So, town meeting
Town meeting.
and town hall. So those were your opportunities to grab a paper ballot.
And online.
And online.
targeted seniors.
No, not.
Voting day?
Election day,
Okay.
the library, and then those other
Town
areas
meeting.
that
Town meeting,
traditionally,
senior
they don't
center.
have access to computers. So I mean, it wasn't a target, it was providing them an opportunity.
fair number of these.
And I can tell you, maybe 4 came from that senior housing down there, maybe.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Doesn't it say right in, don't we have?
And I
a pie
have to
chart?
say, at the end of the day, there was less than 100. And how many did you say we had responses?
Here you go, so
There was,
I mean, there's a pie chart here with, right, this,
there's a pie chart with the ages on there.
so let me just, yeah, I mean, real quick, 18 to 24 was 5%, 25 to 34 was 18%, 35 to 44 was 26%, 45 to 54 was 16%,
Actually, take this whole thing, I have two.
55 to 64 was 19%, 65 to 74 was 11%, 75 and older was 5%. So actually, the majority is 18 to 54. I mean, that's 3/4 of your respondents.
And I just want to mention to you guys that I've talked to Kevin Tocci, and he's going to break this part out of your meeting, and we're going to put it on the Center School Reuse website, along with all of that documentation, all of the studies and tonight's presentation.
And you had asked about the breakdown of, what's paper, what's, what was online. So functionally, Liz, I think you entered the paper surveys into the online. So the 351 is all encompassing of folks who typed it in online, and then what Liz transcribed from the surveys that she picked up.
Okay. The reason I had the questions at my conversations, and not just with my neighbors, but with people around town, maybe I just come off as abrasive. So I haven't heard many people that were excited about having affordable housing in the area.
So if I can just add to that, the idea, and obviously, this is a piece of property owned by the whole town, is to make sure that before we move on with this, we're exhausting any other possibilities of reuse, as you said. There was really no obvious use for it by the school department anymore. And there is a glaring need for senior housing, and affordable senior housing in this town. It's not something that we made up. So we just wanted to see if this is a possibility to address it. It's not that we're steering it one way or another, but we want to do our due diligence. So, and as far as the Affordable Housing Trust, I won't speak for them. I think they'll speak for themselves, but they certainly were extremely open-minded in this process, and I don't know that they actually support it one way or another at this point. This is care and custody of the Board of Selectmen right now.
Looks like 450 people took it. That's what I'm getting out of this, that
You know what?
page.
I may not have updated my slides.
The survey received from 450 people.
Yeah.
I mean, if you do the breakdown of that, 65% was under 54 years old, so 300 people out of the 450 were under 54, and then 150 people were age 54 or older, or 55 or older.
Yeah, I know that it was surprising in the surveys that we do with other communities that we work with. We were actually really impressed with the kind of younger folks who came out to take this survey, which isn't typical in every community we
It's
see.
going to be, yeah, it's going to be about $2 million. So one thing that we have to keep in mind, to do the abatement of the asbestos and whatever needs to be taken out of there and demolish that building and make it a usable surface, is probably upwards of $2 million now. So that's going to come out of our tax levy.
How much would the roof cost? I mean, the roof, I know you were talking about the roof, but roofs are expensive. I mean,
Well, the
On that
roof in the
building,
I would
library,
have,
that's
that
going
has
to
to be close to $1 million roof.
Yeah, unfortunately, it probably is close to $1 million.
I mean,
Yeah.
I just got a quote for like 20.
So there's no
so-
easy answer here, and we're just trying to look at everything. But if we were to keep it, it's going to cost us $1 million for the roof, it's going to cost us $1 million for the asbestos abatement, it's going to cost us a couple $1 million for windows.
We're
So
gonna-
there's a heating system, everything probably.
Before we make a decision, we're gonna have numbers. I would be careful just throwing numbers out there.
Well, we do have
Because you're
these
guessing, and I
numbers.
know it's an educated guess.
We
but-
have
The demolition number came out of the
Yeah.
study for
Oh,
the
from the
North
North
School,
School.
right.
Yeah.
And that was, I don't know, how many years ago?
But that's not included to.
At least 2.5, 3 years
That
ago.
1.2 is not.
That's
No,
not a good
surface
number.
something. Those
No,
are
it
numbers
isn't.
we're guessing on new roofs where.
Well,
Well,
we're never.
We're not there yet, is what
We're
I'm saying,
never
I
going to
guess.
put a roof on the building.
Right.
That's not
Right.
something that
It's
we're
not gonna
going to do. And if this does go further, we won't be doing it. We would, if we finally decided, and I'm not saying we should or would or will, but if we finally decided 16 units of senior housing made sense there. And that's what we found through an RFI, that this was something that could be done and there was actual interest in it. An RFP would go out, and we would say to the development world, tell us what you want, the property's gonna be yours, the project's gonna be yours, here are the guidelines that you have to follow, or you're not going to get this property and you're not gonna get the project. And those guidelines are gonna be very specific to us, but it is not going to be our project or our property anymore, except for where, like I said, we would do a subdivision of land, where we would keep the wooded area, access to it, and the ball field. Now, that's the biggest extreme at this point. But unless we had some other critical use for that building that all of a sudden came up, that was a town building, we have no intention of spending money doing windows, roofs, or anything else. It would,
That's why I just warn that
Yeah.
the more we talk in hypotheticals, the more misinformation or misconstrued we're gonna be. And people
I
are
agree.
gonna start thinking. So I mean, we need to be more about action, get the if we wanna do the RFI next, then let's do it. If we wanna start with the historical, get an historical status on the buildings, then let's do it. But I don't wanna talk about, we could do this, we could do that, 400,000, 200,000, 3 million, because the next day people call and saying, you know, I heard you putting an ice rink up there for $100 million.
Tim has a magical wand.
we're putting an ice rink up there?
Center School's gonna be done overnight, like this.
Chief, what did you have to say?
Just quickly, just two things the gentleman said. First, he said he's up there with his family. I was up there last week, our family, the firefighters were training up there as well. And I was walking around the perimeter myself, and I actually went to that school, so I remember that school in its heyday. There's a lot of vandalism up there, both internally and externally. We have been working hard with the town to try to keep people out, to try to board it up. The kids are getting in there. Beyond that, the graffiti is not family friendly. There's no polite way to put this. I don't know how to correct that. I don't, whether it's just painting over or whatever, but it's deteriorating. So there's that aspect, and I'm aware of that, and so there's that end of it. The other thing is, why aren't we using them now? It was very expensive to maintain both buildings. North and Center School are both the twin buildings, and when they became vacant, this all goes back to the sprinkler system with the fire department. We always own this. They were wet systems, meaning that the entire buildings, the pipes, the sprinkler pipes are always full of water, which means you have to heat the entire building. And twice we had power outages during one of the winter storms. This is going back about 4 or 5 years. Both buildings froze. We found out about this, I think it was, Deputy, remember? I think it was the North School that actually had the most damage, where the pipes were breaking and, we got the alarm. And when we realized what was happening, I immediately sent an engine to Center School to try to shut that valve down because the same thing was happening, which it did. So there's an immense amount of damage with these sprinkler systems in both buildings. It was the monthly cost to heat those buildings, it was going through the roof. And this is back about 4 or 5 years ago. So I don't want to say the town just didn't maintain the buildings. It was extremely expensive, the upkeep for 2 vacant buildings that really could have gone on forever. So, we tried eliminating some of just heating the boiler room. We worked on that for a while, trying to drain the pipes down and just heat the boiler room, but even that it really wasn't feasible. So that's kind of what led to this, so that if the town decided tomorrow, let's just open up the buildings, that's not going to be an easy fix, because we did get estimates at the time can we repair the sprinkler system? It wasn't even worth it. And that wasn't worth it to maintain a vacant building. And that was looking at the visible damage that they could see without going through the walls. The buildings were both built in 1933, I think. So, construction of that period, those, maybe the original sprinkler system from that period, early 50s at the latest. So that's kind of how they got into that condition, unfortunately.
But I agree, it is a shame to see the buildings in the condition they're in. I mean, we've taken care of the Frollo, but it is, regardless, something needs to be done, so we need to move it forward. I mean, this has been way too long.
Center School's getting the brunt of it because it's out of the way. The North School's really, we're seeing it's not getting the same vandalism because it's so wide open.
Right.
The Center School's kind of up in the middle.
I think you had a question?
My name is Mary Snyder. I live at 132 Walnut Street, so my view is Center School from my front porch, and I don't like the graffiti either. My question is, you've loosely used the terms Senior affordable housing and affordable housing, two different words in my dictionary. So are we looking to do 16 units that are just going to be senior, or are you looking at affordable housing, which could mean families? That's,
So,
No, I think the sentiment that we had and the direction we were planning was senior housing. And it probably will have an affordable component to it, senior.
which I understand as senior affordable housing, but then when you get to family affordable housing, that means many more people than you would. with
Well, I don't
senior
think they'd
housing,
be
in
suitable
my-
at 800 square
Yeah,
feet.
They're gonna be like one-bedroom units at best.
Again,
yeah.
But
with
the idea,
way
the idea
real estate
and the
is,
concern that I saw and the concern that I got from the Affordable Housing Trust was there was a big need for affordable senior housing in this town, and I think some of the charts we show that. So yeah, that would be the direction that we would be going in.
because it seems like some of these towns, they started that way possibly, and then added, like the one that added on and ended up with 38 units.
no, so I can tell you, the schools in Auburn, Auburn was similar to Abington. Auburn identified a need for senior housing, and they put out the RFP specifying that those schools were to be redeveloped for senior housing. I believe Swampscott was similar. But then in Bridgewater and Templeton, those are actually, they're family housing, so they are not age restricted. All of them are affordable housing, whether it's senior housing, whether it's not. If there's an income restriction, you could call that affordable housing. And then if you do restrict it to a specific population, that might be 55 plus, it might be 62 plus. So the schools on this chart, those schools in Auburn, those two sister schools, those are age restricted, and the school in Swampscott is also age restricted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know when we did the community outreach, Scott, on Zoom, the community, from hearing from the residents that if anything was to go in that school or development there, it would be affordable senior housing. I know because people in our groups were specifically against family housing, affordable family housing, but more specifically, they wanted, the town was centered on, if anything, affordable senior housing.
Well, like Scott said, if it goes out to an RFP, we will specify what it has to be. And I think we're a ways.
Because I know a lot of the residents, they took into
Away from
account
that.
just the services for the town if it potentially would be affordable family housing.
No housing is affordable this day and age,
Well, true,
unfortunately.
this is true.
But yeah, it should be
You know,
senior.
the services, especially with the school department,
I think the sentiment is senior housing.
affordable senior
Yeah,
housing.
affordable senior housing.
Yeah, we did ask in the survey if, what type of housing, and senior housing was the only one that jumped out, so.
Okay, any other questions, Kenny?
Ken Coyle, 222 High Street, and I am not in a butter. I'm also a member of the Abington's Affordable Housing Trust, which is fairly new in town. We're just getting our feet wet. We have a lot to learn. We also have 4 members, myself and 3 other members here in this room tonight, so I would hope that they are for affordable housing. At one of our very first meetings, it was decided that we wanted to bring affordable housing to Abington with a priority for Abington seniors and Abington young in the form of low-interest first-time home buyers loan. But our priority was affordable housing for seniors. So, and also to note is I'm on the Historical Commission, so we will get right to work on trying to, see if we can hire someone to get fast-track getting them on the historical. We probably have to wait to make sure it's something that's going to fit into the RFI. I do want to make one note of the Bridgewater Project. And it's funny, too, because I was driving by there, and I saw it, and I looked it up, and I thought it was really exciting, but I'm kind of a nerd. But it uses all 3 forms of the CPA funds. So historical, the school is historical. It has a playground in back, a new playground in back, so it uses that form of park and rec money from the CPA. And finally, housing, obviously. So this is something that could happen up here, I really, truly believe. There's also a project in Rockland now with a Holy Family School. The difference in that is that that's privately owned. We have the advantage of owning this property. I just read on it today. It's 27 units. and the town is requiring that the builders make it 60% affordable, so anyone that fits in that bracket, you have to be, make less than 60%, and it's also age restricted where you have to be 62, which, I just turned 62, so maybe you might have to, I don't really want to move to Rockland, but I just want to, I guess the question I think that our committee has is what is the next step, and what do you need us to do? I would imagine that you would give us a recommendation as to what's going to happen to the property, or, so we just kind of need to know, you know. And the other thing, I just want to make note, and I'm going to show my age, but I was on the Griffin's Dairy Committee, and we hemmed and hawed, nobody could make a decision, and then finally the barn, the most historical feature on the property, burned down, and it was sad. So this, every year we wait, and this project's not going to happen overnight, it's going to take years. So, and the building is falling apart, so I don't mean to rush you guys, but...
It's been 10 years.
Yeah,
So
right, so
not much
but hopefully
of a
we can
rush.
come up with something, you know, and again, we're not pushing either way, you know. We haven't taken, you know, Scott mentioned, we haven't taken any votes as to what we want to do with the property because it's not our call. You know, I was on the selectmen when we decided to turn these two properties, nobody wanted these properties. And we were also smart enough not to sell them. We didn't sell them, we're hanging on to them. That's a good thing and a bad thing, you know, because we're hanging on to them. We might have to demolish them and pay for the fee to demolish them. But we also made sure we're not selling it to the highest bidder. So that's a good thing. We own the properties, and that's going to help us when we go out to bid.
So Scott, what do you think is the next step?
I would just, if this board would authorize us to begin the process for an RFI and get some interest in...
Just to see what's out there for interest.
Yeah.
And if there's no interest, then we're back to the drawing. Even
Yeah.
if there is interest, it doesn't mean
I
we're...
mean, we'll find out from the development community what they would have an appetite for and at what level of financial commitment would be on our side.
What
And
time frame are we looking for an RFI?
we could put it together fairly quick. I mean, it's fairly, it's an informal process. I mean, it doesn't have to, it's not like an RFP that's requiring, but, so I think putting it together, but we'd probably looking at a few months, 3 to 6 months anyways.
Okay.
Yeah, we want to get as much response as possible.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, we'll discuss options that, like I said, bundle the two projects too.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Hi, I'm Pam Howe, 149 Walnut Street, and I just wanted to point out a few things that I got here late. I had a family emergency, so I've been helping my mom who had a fall, so anyway. We talked about the footprint of the school. I also wanted, you know, just to make everybody else aware that there are 2 projects going in down the street from this. We have affordable housing, 40B going in down by the train station. That's got 200 and something units, I think, going in down there. And then the other project across the street behind the senior center off of Plymouth Street, 144 units of age-restricted senior housing. There's no sidewalks on Summer Street, so, you know, access to the senior center, you know, there'd have to be cars. You know, I just feel like it's not really the best site for this with the development going on in the community with the traffic. You know, it's kind of just like a nestled community thing. I would like to see the school taken down and it left for open space. I think that was kind of a lot of what they had on the graphs that they did. 38%, if there's anything in particular you think the town should consider in redeveloping the site, open space, trees, woods. 27% services, police, fire, schools. You know, it is going to draw on the services too because it's housing. I'm wondering, you know, we talked about getting the school demolished and how we'd pay for that. I don't know if there's funding out there for, you know, developing open space, developing green space. I see that sometimes online or in the newspaper. And that might be something to look into also, to see if we could get help with the cost of that. I also know the development going in down the street, and this is just my brain and the way it works. They have no recreational space, the one going in by the train station. I've been going to all those meetings now for a couple of years, and those residents are going to have, no park, no green space there. I mean, maybe that developer would be willing to do something to help us out with something with the school, to help out their residents. Just, I've heard of the, friendly 40Bs where they'll do something to help the town, so.
Well, that hasn't been the most friendly
It has
back and
not been,
forth.
it has not been the most friendly.
Maybe if we started off with that instead of.
I know, and I know we were.
I think we kind of handled that
We were
poorly, and
even
that's
trying
why
to
we're-
find sidewalks, but hey. if
Now
you-
we're stuck with twice as many apartments and 40B.
Exactly, but,
never know.
it's an idea. I mean, I'm just trying to come up with ideas and stuff, but, like I said, I think, there's other options too. There's land behind Shaw Ave, and there's land on Glenavich Way that, is owned and by the senior housing complexes. That might also be something that can be developed into senior housing down the line. That would be another, just trying to find, I'd like to come up with solutions when I have an idea, so. Just putting it out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we need to look at all these ideas, and, we can certainly look and see if there is any funding to create open space there. I don't know, once we get our open space plan.
Yeah, again, that's for another subject, but yeah, we are working on a grant that will help us get the open space plan updated, and that will make us eligible for further grant money that can go into trails and rehabbing open space, and I don't think it'll get us enough to tear down a building, but it would be nice. But I agree, we definitely want to look at all options.
Okay, is there anything else on this subject? Okay, thank you all.